One thing I've learned, if you don't hold their feet to the fire, everybody gets burned.
Hold on. Before you start waving around that freedom of speech thing, when you're in a crowded movie theater and you scream fire, you better be able to smell smoke. If you come on this radio show and you start saying incandescent things like that, you better have more behind you, pal, than just your thumb. I've been listening to talk radio for years, and one thing I just can't stand is when the host has to, push his way on the people, beat the callers into his way of thinking, extending his ego. Or when the callers call in and say something so outrageous, and the host lets it go unchallenged. The sign you're on the road to truth is the lack of contradiction. You want to find truth, you just don't simply believe somebody because of their authority or their degree, or you listen to what they say, you test it against reality, and you hold their feet to the fire. We are back, kind of live. It's taped, but I'm pretty much acting as if it was live. I mean, there's not going to be any editing. I may stop to sneeze, but other than that, and I'm doing it earlier because it suits me better with work in the morning and whatnot. So, what I started last week, and I recommend, I'll put the link in the bottom here, that you listen to the last show. First part of it, I think, was a little bit news. The last part, I got into what I'm going to be doing here. Now, what I did was I sat down earlier this week, given what I said last week, and I started to write down what I wanted to say, at least to use as notes. And I will be uploading the notes to a Drive, Google Drive account that'll be public if you have the link. And you can download the notes as I put them up there. Also, I put up already a PDF version of a Bible study that I did back in the 90s on the Sermon on the Mount, which will be a lot of the stuff I'll be talking about. It is doctrinally, dogmatically in the Baptist church at the time, and it'll be interesting to see when I go over it what changes may be. Not in principle, really, but perhaps some of the Baptist theology that has kind of seeped in. But to be honest with you, I was pretty, it really opened my eyes, and I got me thinking about the problems with the doctrines. Nothing major, I would say major, but it caused me that plus a breakdown of things going on in my life, divorce, and just a whole mess of stuff that happened that kind of cracked me open like an egg. And God stuffed Humpty Dumpty back in again, only it was a little different this time. And I had a greater sensitivity, unfortunately, to things around me, pain and suffering, more empathy, or an empath. But I also had an increase in insight. I would use the term very loosely, prophecy. My idea of prophecy is be able to discern truth. There's a little meter inside. It goes when you hit truth, and there's an anti-meter that does that when you hit lies. So using that plus the lack of contradiction, which is very important. God has no contradiction. So if you do, you have to relook at where your givens and find out what may be wrong. And if they're not wrong, there might be missing a piece that'll be coming along. This is why it took me years to do this. I started back in the 90s, and here we are, 2019, so we're talking 23 years, 20 plus years. And I've gone through a lot of studies in the New Age and on Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, Catholics, various denominations of Protestantism, studying in the Bible itself, going back to the Greek and Hebrew, going into non-commentaries, but in linguistic writing works. I mean, nothing, this sounds really, wow, but no, I mean, I using this guide I had, I would say, there's something here I got to check out, and then I would go look into it. So it wasn't exhaustive, but when I stuck my nose in the section, it was. And I learned a lot of stuff, and it was good news. Because coming from a very down, depressed, failure area I was at, I just re-questioned everything. Is there a God? Is God good? Is the Bible true? Is it worth anything? What's the deal? I just started from square one and redid it. I did have faith in that I felt myself being re-put together. It's a weird thing. So, I mean, I did have personal, it doesn't help me to say this to you, but I mean, I had an internal guidance that I had some credence in, not in me per se, but God through me in whatever. Anyway, I don't want to get too long-winded on this here, but this is what I did, and I studied this for many years. Now, when Art Bell times came along, this kind of studying concepts went into looking into, Art Bell stuff, which I did when I did the show, 2003. When Art Bell went off the air, I started doing this, and it went on for a while. But now it just seems that we're in these latter days, and that's something I could talk about as well. I mean, it is possible we're entering these latter day times. But again, I could go into that at another point. So I think it's very important to go through this stuff now. I mean, this is my opinion, and people, I'm not trying to sell it here. I'm not trying to convert anybody. I'm just sharing, and people can best decide what, if anything, it does help for them. Now, what I'm calling this, I don't know, a series, for lack of a better word, is called Fathoming the Unfathomable. The Unfathomable. Fathoming the Unfathomable. I guess it would help if I could say it right. Subtitling it, Bringing Eternal Principles into Space-Time. Again, I would refer to last week's cast to get what I'm talking about, that God is outside space-time, is outside of our understandable ability, being internal and timeless and limitless and whatever. And we are all the opposite of those things. So we can't, we could not understand and fathom God, but we could get principles from him, and we could see glimpses of him as he, in actuality or in representation, enter space-time, and we can get things out of its creation and see how the clockwork of mechanism of the universe works. This is why it's important for those to have Big Bang and a godless evolution, because of the desire to not have a designer and therefore some kind of limits or purposes. So these fathoming the unfathomable, the problem is God is is not understandable, is unfathomable, and so that it's kind of dismaying, because then we don't know. We're like, well, how can we know God, or how do we know what He wants to do, and what's best for us, and why did He make me, or why did He make us? What's the deal? The good news is that God's principles are timeless and unchangeable, meaning it applies to everybody and every time. The bad news is we are not. So how does one glean wisdom from our lives in a material, corrupted world, from a God who is not material and not corrupted? God has sent many prophets to help us, and the greatest prophet was Jesus, named the Christ, ultimately bridging the gap in understanding between heaven and earth. And this is why I personally have decided throughout my readings that Jesus is the most important figure in the Bible, or for that matter, for in humandom, and that when he came when he came here alive, he corrected the past and taught what the reality of the principles of the Father was. So I've spent a lot of time in Jesus' teachings as opposed to the salvation work and the narrative of the New Testament. I deal with literally the red letters, what Jesus said. That's my own focus. Everything else is underneath that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I will be reading some verses, and I do use the NASB, and I think I explained it already. I think they did a good job of being real careful to be accurate and not simply make an easy reading book, but one that reads real. But, again, you could use virtually any of them. But it's important to understand that Jesus is like the vortex from heaven to earth. Through him, the principles were taught that are accurate, so we could set our spiritual watch by his theology. This is my decisions that I've made, and this is why I've focused in on his teachings. One of the things that if you kind of decrypt it in its somewhat Gnostical flavor, John 14 is very good. Jesus says, "He who has seen me has seen the Father." How could you say, "Show us the Father"? Do you not believe that I am the Father and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own initiative, but the Father abiding in me does his works. Believe me that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Otherwise believe because of the works themselves. Truly I say to you, truly I say to you, he who believes in me and the works that I do, he will do also, and greater works than these he shall do, because I go to the Father. Now, it sounds a little flowery and almost double-speaky, but again, when Jesus talked, he talked to a Jewish, Greek package around the Jewish community back at the time. I should say Hebrew. I don't know if it makes a difference. And so there's a culture there. There's going to be words that they use, and there's going to be things that are said that we have to understand over here. So we have to learn what the words were, what did they mean back then, how did they apply, is there any idioms in there and so forth. We have to find all this stuff out and then glean from the principles, which then we can apply in our lives. So when I look at this, and he says, you who has seen me as a Father, what I think is in there is, and I don't know what word to use, because it's a feel, think, spiritual thing that has come together. It's like mind, body, spirit working together. So I don't know what phrase to use on it. But I also don't want to get too flowery and self-important either. So, but he who see me has seen the Father means that the unfathomable Father as manifested into humanity via Jesus. This is as good as you're going to get in the flesh, because you're unable to perceive those things. Now, once we leave the flesh and our soul and that type of stuff is more open to our consciousness, like we'll become living in that spiritual realm, and we'll have access to eyes that can see deeper and farther and minds that can think better. Well, we'll have a better understanding. But as it stands now, Jesus is as good as it gets. And this is what he's saying. Believe it, I am in the Father. Now, I'm not going to get into high theology here about this, that it's the Father is on earth. I don't want to get into any of that. I'm looking at this very simply and applying it to. And so what I'm taking from this is that he's not speaking on his own initiative, but the Father is speaking within him. See, if you go back in the past, I've come up with stuff about how I think the soul and the spirit and all that is combined, and the physics behind it. And this is where this some of the work comes from. So that all I'm taking from this at this point, and I want to just filter off any other discussions because it's going to just keep us off track. And one of the problems we have in spiritual discussions is everyone's got their beliefs and opinions, and they argue about these peripheral things, and we throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I'm going to focus on the baby here. So we have Jesus saying, now, granted, Jesus is saying this himself, and so people could go, well, anybody could just say anything. But he also addresses it here. If you don't believe what I'm saying, then believe by the works themselves, because Jesus had done a lot of miracles and whatnot, which kind of gives him like, hey, this guy is a little different than other people. He even dealt with the Pharisees saying, well, he's doing it because of the devil, by Beelzebub, the demons, king of the demons, whatever. And he goes in to explain that by throwing out a demon throwing out a demon only is going to destroy the demons. It's got to be somebody from above. But I'll let that go because I don't want to. The trick is to distill out the timeless principles written, principles in the writings from another epoch and culture and apply them to our lives today. Many religions have collected opinions, interpretations over the centuries and have dogmatically added them to the original teachings. Over the years, I have focused on discovering and extracting the core points, meanings, principles, and apply them to my life, and I will share what I found. This is important because a lot of time, it's like a freight train. You have Jesus is the engine, and then all the cars have been added on by 2,000 years of interpretations and dogmas and whatnot. So what I'm trying to do is go back and find the core teachings. Now, it would be nice if I had Jesus here to talk to him and kind of interview him, but luckily, over the years, people have collected his sayings and put together in the Gospels. Got a pretty good thing. I also maintain that there's enough there to get the job done. In other words, what we need to know to get through life and find our niche and how we should act within it, there's enough there. So, if we don't find out, like, for example, one of the things I probably will mention it later, but is that I don't care about reincarnation. But people say there is no reincarnation. People say there is. That doesn't matter, because by definition, you don't remember what happened last time anyway. And if you do remember, is it real or is it an imagination? And so this principle that I came up with, which says everything that you need to do the job of being you and learning in God's principles is available to you, both in the world itself, looking at creation, going through creation in life, watching other people, teachers, and so forth. But most importantly, centered at that to me is Jesus' teachings. So which is why Jesus is so powerful and why it goes all over the world in different cultures. There isn't any religion that rejects Jesus except, I think, at least being a prophet, except perhaps the fundamental Judaism. But that and atheists, and even atheists could say, well, Jesus was a fine philosopher. So even there's still a positive thing. So what I'm going to be trying to do here in these webcasts, which I'm going to produce on the fly in real time, addressing issues as I am led. I have a little thing I'm looking through now to get me through this first one to get some of these principles out so I don't forget them. But that's what I'll be basically doing, is writing down notes and then expounding on it. Some principles I've always covered in other webcasts and will not be included in much detail as others that are being newly presented. What follows are some givens. These are, if you've been into math in high school or college, and you have to write proofs, especially geometry. I had to do this. You have to prove a equation. There are certain laws and givens that you can introduce into the proof without having to prove them. They're already a given, so that you can then go on to prove what needs to be proved. So in this case, I'm going to produce to you a bunch of my givens that I have found out. Now, this has taken, over the years, 20 years, 20 plus years, I've come up with these givens that have proven themselves to the point where now I consider them like a fact, a principle, a founding principle, which I can rely on, that allowed me to answer a lot of questions. I've answered to my satisfaction a lot of hard questions about the world, and it's because of these things. So one of the statements here, one of the givens, this is be in caps. I'll post the pages up at this Google Drive thing. All teachings about God and his principles must be considered within the context of Jesus' teachings. Absolutely. When Jesus came, one of his jobs was to set the record straight. And he came here to correct problems and underline things that were good, tweak things around the way to get back on the path. Many prophets have done this throughout time. They have gone to preach, Jonah, Nineveh, for example, and the prophets by definition, and this is why I think prophecy is more truth than like telling the future. Of course, future truths are telling, but this is that's the fun part, or the glory or glamour part. The nitty gritty, everyday dirty stuff, getting your hands dirty in the earth is what I mean, is simply finding out what is true, what is real at the moment. So all of the teachings about God, everything about the Old Testament, New Testament, stuff that's not in there, if you want to talk about other religious aspects, all of this stuff has to be kind of strained through the strainer of Jesus, which will set it all right in his teachings. And again, I maintain that there's enough of those teachings to do the job. Not everything, but there's enough. And I mean by not everything is like Jesus didn't taught everything that ever is. He taught what is survived. I'm trying to think where the other part of that word is. But what has survived over time is enough. So all teachings about God and his principles must be considered within the context of Jesus' teachings, in particular the writings of his disciples and the doctrines of the churches over the millennia. It is the whole point of the Sermon on the Mount to correct the teachings stale, misunderstood, and altered by humans over time. It's like the point of the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest collection of Jesus' sayings in the Bible. And I maintain if you just have the Sermon on the Mount, that'll get you through life and how to do things. So I just use an example. One, you can look up Matthew 5 and Luke 6:20 and read the Sermon on the Mount is continued in there. And we will get to those things over time. But this is just an example of Jesus correcting the teachings of the time. You have heard that it was said, you should not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So he's furthering the legalistic aspects where I could, look and lust at a woman, but they don't touch. Look, but don't touch, right? Jesus is going, no. Anyone who's even looked at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery in her heart, proving that the sin is in the heart as opposed to out into nature. That's very important because what a big difference in the application of it. So, if you study Jesus' words, on one hand, it's going to be like, oh, wow, this guy was strict. On the other hand, it's very liberating. Because if you don't go there, in your heart, it doesn't work its way out into the physical world. And Jesus said at another time that you shouldn't kill, but if you've already hated your brother, you've already killed him in your heart. So there's that aspect of if you hate somebody, it can work its way out into the physical world in harming or death or what have you. If you lust in your heart, it works its way out into the physical world of actually physically adultery. So when you look at all these things, you realize that Jesus is talking really deep, good stuff. Like, hey, keep within these things inside, keep your heart clean, and you don't have to worry about the other stuff. If you're not looking, a movie, I can't, I can't watch movies that sex stuff, and it's just no point, because the whole idea of sexual relations with your woman is going to be a personal, spiritual relationship thing. You're not going to put it out on TV or on the movies, So I mean, this is just an example of what I said. Jesus, when he came here, probably one of the greatest things he did is the teachings. And unfortunately, and maybe this is some kind of proof, the churches don't teach about Jesus' teachings. It's Paul. Paul's the big hero of the church because Paul created the Christian church, not Jesus. Paul used Jesus, and I'm not even saying he did it evil. I mean, this is how he did it. I mean, maybe, a lot of good come from it, so I'm not going to criticize it, but it's just a fact. The Christian church as it is today is designed by Paul using some of Jesus' words. And then later on, after Paul's writings, which are the earliest in the Bible, then came the Gospels. So to me, I almost look at the Gospels as kind of keeping the Pauline church in check because of the potential for legalism and whatnot in the structure of the church. Another verse that talks about Jesus, I look at as a typical example of Jesus being the focal point of the teachings, not the disciples. Truly I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. So obviously the disciples aren't greater than God, than Jesus, and Jesus is bringing into the world, into space-time, language, and culture, the principles of God. Jesus also referred that God knows, like, for example, when the end comes, even he didn't know. Jesus, at least in his human form, had limitations from the Father. I mean, this is just true. I mean, there's nothing implied to it. I'm not saying anything. It's just the way it is. Another quote I have put down here: as a result of many of his disciples, as a result of this, the teachings at the time he was talking about, you have to eat my body and drink my blood, and people were getting freaked out by this because it was like cannibalism. And as a result of this, his disciples withdrew, and many of his disciples withdrew, and were not talking with him anymore. It got a little tough, and they were like, well, I don't know about this. So Jesus said to the 12, you do not want to go away also, do you? And Simon Peter, you got to love him. He's messed up, but he's also the first guy stepping out into water and stepping out and saying these things. It's really kind of an example of humanity. Lord, to whom will she go? To whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. And see, even with their unhappiness with the teachings and the kind of other people are walking away and they're like, but where can we go? You have it all. And so that's what I do. That's what I think. It's like, there's nowhere else to go. Jesus has the words of eternal life. And he's taught so much stuff. I think I talked in an earlier verse about the word, eternal. Is a real tough word. That for the most part, when you read it, the eternal, that doesn't just mean like living forever, but it has to do with the breadth. He has the words of the widest type of life, the longest life, the biggest life, the tallest life, the most powerful life. When we move on out into the spirit realm from the physical, you see by having the principles that guided you here, it'll grow. What we've done, another quotes is, what you've done here a little bit more big will be given. So they're saying like, yeah, we're alive now. But following the teachings of you, Jesus, you have the words of the expanded, endless, wide, beautiful, unlimited beauty, or expanded beauty, expanded power, expanded knowledge. That's what the word eternal is really saying. So whenever you see that, think of this bigger picture, not just long life. Like, I'm not going to die, I'm going to keep living. That's too small of a way to look at it. Now let me move on to another principle. These are all bullet pointed, and again, I'll put the writing up. Excuse my coughing here. I guess I don't talk much, and so when I do, if Jesus did not teach it, it is not as important as what Jesus did teach. If Jesus did not teach it, it is not as important as what he did teach. It doesn't mean whatever this is may be wrong or a lie, etc. Jesus came to save humanity from deception and destruction, so his teachings are focused on this end. As I've posted earlier, I came up with a little saying here: the rope to a drowning man is more important, more significant to what color shirt he is wearing. And over time, the churches and doctrine arguments have been talking about what color shirt to wear, and Jesus has got the rope for the drowning man. And if people say, well, what about again? I'm going to use reincarnation just as a easy example. Well, did Jesus teach reincarnation? Well, there's some potential interpretations. A couple of things, very possible. They're minorly possible, and that's why a lot of people look at the Gospel of Thomas, the writings they found, because it had some things that more alluded to. But it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant, and I'll just prove it to you right now. Real simple, logical, critical thinking example. All right. So, what if there is reincarnation? What does that mean? How would you change your life right now? Well, it means that if I die, I'll keep going on. Well, of course you're going to keep going on. Well, it means like if I don't get it right, I can get it right next time. Well, that's a defeatist attitude. I'm saying that there's enough out there that Jesus teaches you in your life, and the stuff in your life, there is enough to get you through to do your part in it. I'm not talking about a work salvation, but I do say, and we'll see this as I go on, the quality of your afterlife is tied to how you are here. Perhaps not whether you burn in hell, but the quality nonetheless. So, and we'll get to that along the way. So I got a couple of verses here. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that what is lost. And that's Luke 19. I'll have all this written down. Luke 19:10. For God did not send the world into the world to judge the world, but that the world might be saved through him. That's the next line from the old John 3:16. That's John 3:17. That's the point that he came. He came, Jesus, I'm going to read my own words back. Jesus came to save humanity from deception and destruction. That is exactly what Satan is doing, deceiving and destroying. Just look out in the news. Now you got kids supposed to changing their genders. It's all about Satan's goal is to take the principles of humanity and God and pervert them and laugh back at God with them. I don't know why. I mean, to me, it's dumb because God is God, but maybe Satan is deluded enough and powerful enough to think he can win, or possibly when he gets thrown down to the earth, as it says in Revelations, that he realizes his time is short, so he does a scorched earth. Kind of what's going on now with Trump. Things are relative. Things are mirrored. Principles are continued. So evil is going to want, if evil can't outright sit on the throne, it wants to destroy the throne. That's how it works. So, again, back, I'm going to second this principle. If Jesus did not teach it, it is not as important as what Jesus did teach. So this is why I advocate reading Jesus' teachings. Follow the teachings of what he says. It will lead you through the world and keep you from the deceptions. And if you learn the principles he taught, you can actually go into a deceived world and use these principles to find truth in the deceived world. All right, he's got some more of my bullet points. These are my givens, as I said earlier. These are things that I use when I try to interpret what Jesus said, or anything out in the world. These are things I use as givens. They're things that have been proven to me over time. I'm not going to spend time proving it to you in terms of going back over the last 20 years and figure out how I figured it out. You could just try it out or not or whatever. The words used to teach meant specific things in the context and the culture of the time that they were spoken or written. The words used to teach meant specific things, and in the context and the culture of the time that they were spoken or written. We must determine what they meant at the time in the native language and determine if any cultural idioms were used to determine what was conveyed in these writings correctly. If, for example, if I can use a example, man, that guy was cool. Now, if you don't have the person saying it with the, so you're a future culture, you're looking back and going, boy, that man was cool. Does that mean he was cold? Or is there an idiom that means something else? Well, that's been around forever. There's always idioms. There's always metaphors that are meant to give a principle. I mean, look at Aesop's fables, right? Excuse me. So that's pretty much there, naked by itself. It's just there. That this is just true. If we don't believe that, then there's no point in reading it. If the words don't actually have meaning, it's like what's going on in the political realm today. People just saying anything. Now you could be a man or a woman and not be a man or a woman just because. So, another important thing I've learned: things do not need to be literally true in order to convey truth. Things do not have to be literally true to convey truth. Many get lost in the arguments of whether an account as presented in the Bible happened as given. Be it literal or figurative, it does not affect the truths taught in the report. Take Jesus' parables, for example. Does that mean that there were really literally people doing in the parables? It's a story to convey the principle. Faith does not believe an account inasmuch as living out the principles taught in the account. And this is very important. There so many arguments get involved in, was the earth made in 6 days and 7 in the rest? Especially when you talk about Jesus returning. What about the 7 weeks? The 7 periods of 7. That's what it means literally. What does that mean, right? But people determine it means this and it means that. It doesn't matter. To me, if God made the world in 6 days, great. If it was a figurative sense to explain how he breathed life into creation at some point, I'm fine with it. I don't care. Because that has nothing to do with my salvation of getting through the deceptions and not being destroyed by the world. Now, it could be used to deceive me, and it could be used, the arguments can be used to get me off track. This is why I just don't, people say, hey, what's that? It doesn't matter to me. And they're like, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. If Jesus didn't teach it, it's not as important as what he taught. Remember that. Things don't have to be literal to convey truth. Again, think of a parable. There's truths in the parable. Doesn't mean that they have to be literally true. So it's not that I'm okaying, that I'm advocating, allowing, or I'm seconding an evolutionary view, a time frame. No, it's irrelevant. I don't care about it. I don't have no interest in it. I don't talk about it. It doesn't matter to me. And I'm not doing it to avoid the deal with, you're trying to avoid the science and stay in your superstition. No, because obviously we've seen science is riddled with superstition. In the global warming stuff, and even in the Big Bang itself. Now they don't have enough time in their models to say that the age of the universe looks too young for their models and all that. It's all a waste of time. I mean, it's interesting, right? If that's your hobby, so to speak, it's your thing that you're interested, like writing music. If you want to try and unlock the secrets of the material world, that's fine. Nothing wrong with it. Well, when your job is to unlock the secrets of the world, to get rid of having to have some kind of a god, to me, it's just you're just being deceived. Again, deceived and destruction is the goal of the world. Another bullet point, another principle: do not focus on the tone of what was said, but on what was said. Also, the tolerance of cultural practices does not necessarily convey support for such practices. You look back throughout time. Excuse me. I cough more doing the show than any other time. Due to cultural differences, things may seem harsh or primitive compared to our times. Well, elements were harsh and primitive back then. But there are principles that can be conveyed forward and applied to our times. For example, let's see, I'm going to talk on my own, and here I wrote this stuff down here. Hold on for 1 second. Slavery was an economic reality, as was a patriarchy. But there were positive references to freedom and women leaders at the time. Many have used the Bible to justify oppression, the supremacy of race, cultures over others. Don't fall for this trap. Back in the United States, there was slavery, early days of slavery, but it was the principles of growing up, Christian principles, which led to the ending of slavery. So that's a good thing. It's not that, the United States is built on slavery. No, the whole world was built on slavery. The entire world had slaves. Still do. And but it was these principles that matured along the way to stop slavery. Now, those people who were involved in the wrongdoings, this is another principle. I haven't got to that, and I even wrote it down yet, but I'll get to it eventually again, is that if you play a part in the furthering of righteousness, which causes you harm, you will be recompensed, and it'll be, as Jesus said, 7 times over, pressed down. To you give God a bushel of wheat, you get it back overflowing, pushed down to make sure more fits in there. So whatever harms have been done in the teaching of the general world or any groups of society of how to get more correct and closer to God, those people will be recompensed. Doesn't make it okay it happened, just that God is completely and absolutely fair, and that all suffering is for the best of all. Again, it doesn't mean it's okay. So if you're one who's making someone to suffer, you have some kind of karma to work out there. Obviously, you're not on the right track to be doing it, and you may have to suffer to understand personally what they have done. So don't go back and say, well, it was okay to have, women be silent in the church. Perhaps they weren't educated at the time. They weren't allowed to be, and so a lot of them, either didn't talk much about it, or they were non-spiritually talking about it, and then there were some who were, and they were highlighted in the Bible. So I mean, you can go find anything you want in the Bible. Here's my last thing. See, I'm following my own little thing. The Bible has a knack of exposing one's own heart by what you find in it. The Bible has a knack of exposing one's own heart by what you find in it. If you find justification for oppression of one race over another, for example, that's your heart. The Bible exposed it, brought it into reality. Your actions are now waving a big sign going, here I am. It's like a word-seek puzzle. People's life patterns can be found in the Bible and be used to justify their actions. It's just another method the Bible exposes their delusions. But those seeking truth will be attracted to it and will find it in abundance. See Jesus' discourses on the Pharisees. I do have one on Matthew 23. He points out how they, tithe mint. They were so important about tithing, they tithed even their spices to be accurate. But then they ended up taking widows' houses. They clean the outside, but the inside is unclean. Jesus, it's a really good thing to read. He really read it in the Riley Act. The only people he really criticized, not even Rome, but was the church leaders at the time. And I think a lot of Christian churches, those were Jewish and it doesn't count. No, it's the same deal. That was the church at the time, if I can use the term church to mean the religious institutions, and now we have our own here. So it's up to us to find out to not fall in the same track. God is not looking to make slaves, but teach his children, and we all are God's children, to understand why his principles are the best thing ways. If that makes sense. Why the principles are the best way for success, salvation, if you will, in one's life and beyond. Let me read that again. God is not looking to make slaves, but to teach his children to understand why his principles are the best way for success, salvation, if you will. Remember, deception, stop deceiving and destruction in one's life and beyond. If you sincerely ask God to open your eyes to recognize truth, the gates of hell cannot stop that from happening. But hell will attempt to interfere by using our vulnerabilities against us. Those attacks will only serve God's purpose in revealing those fault lines for us to address. This leads me to my favorite verse in the Bible, though it was not spoken by Jesus. And we know that all causes of things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purposes. Now, how I would phrase that, it's kind of awkward that who are called. King James puts the called. Ecclesia is calling out. That's what the church means, ecclesia. How I would phrase it is, all things are structured to work toward the highest good for those who love God and seek, learn, and adopt his principles in their life. So if you are called according to his purposes, you are seeking to find his purpose in your life, which is to, reverse deception and save from destruction. I would also assert that in any situation, all things work toward the good of all involved, but most efficient and least painful pathway is through God's principles. So my old saying is, God's going to use you as an example. It's up to you if it's a good or a bad one. But I've learned many things not to do and many things to do based on how people are doing something. Like, oh, boy, I'm not going to do that. That's for sure. Look what happens. Or, hey, that person made me feel pretty bad. I'm going to remember not to do this to someone else. I mean, you're going to learn the principles, and you're going to be used as a teacher. You're going to be used as an example. It's up to you whether it's a good one or not. We've all been on both sides of that. So this is the good thing is if you go out into the world and realize that all things are working for you, for your best, highest good, painful or not, bad or not, just a different attitude that comes up. I get caught. I get caught in down and stuff too. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in my life that's quite stressful and upsetting. And got to remember that everything's going to work out. It's everything will work out, but there's a reason why you're here, and there's a reason that you might have to learn being here so that you can go there, whatever that is. I started this journey in the 90s and will share what I found. I don't claim any authority or prophetic mandate from God. I'm just sharing what I have found in my sincere search to know God and His principles the best I can. Any value of these webcasts, to God be the glory. I don't take these webcasts lightly. And quote James, I call James the fourth gospel. He was the only disciple that actually got what Jesus was saying. And James's book was pretty early in the game, too, in writing and in history. Let not many of you become teachers, my brethren, knowing that as such we will incur a stricter judgment, for we all stumble in many ways. And hey, that's why I'm saying I'm not saying God has sent me. Hopefully God is involved in this, and God is involved in what I learn. I mean, I believe what I'm believing. I'm telling you what I believe, and my belief was based on the practical reality of life over time, lack of contradiction, looking at the words that were said, seeing how it applies in the real world, and it's true. This is like a serious thing here for me, and so I'm just sharing it. I also follow Matthew 10:3, freely you received, freely give. So this is what I'm really going to be doing in this. I have a verse I threw out at the end. When the disciples heard this, they were astonished and said, "Who can be saved?" And looking at them, Jesus said to them, "With people, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible." And I'm telling you, that is the only reason why I am alive today. If you can convince me that there is no God and we're all going to just go to the grave and die and be nothing, I would just go do it. Because this is, for the most people on this planet, this is a negative existence with positive sprinkles along the way because of the evil that's being done by the dark side. But God is allowing it to happen. So all things that God does work for good. So God allows evil to happen, it'll work out to good somehow. Yeah, wait a minute. What about the kid who was thrown in a dumpster and was killed? I don't have an answer for it, okay? I just know all things will work out in the end for the highest, best good of all. So I don't know why that happened. I'm not even going to explain it. I'm not going to look at the mother whose kid was kidnapped and killed, and it all works out for good in the end. No. What I would be doing with that person is crying with them, with their pain, because it's terrible. And I don't know why this stuff happens. I just know the big picture. Like the old saying is, I saw the end and we all win. But boy, it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of pain. And if we just listen to what God said in the beginning, in the Garden of Eden, when He talked about, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, not the tree of knowledge, the tree of knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil, the tree that will demonstrate to you to have a experiential awareness of why things are good and bad. Instead, God said, eat from the tree of life. And we didn't. And I'm not going to sit here and just blame Adam and Eve, because we all have bitten from that fruit somewhere along the way. And right now we're learning in real time, in painful time, in excruciating times, we're learning why things are good and why things are evil and the difference between them. And that's what I think, in a nutshell, is the purpose of life on earth. At least it is now. I mean, if that story is actual, like that event really happened, or as opposed to a little story about some other thing, perhaps there was a different plan. There really was open that maybe that wouldn't happen. Maybe they'd eat the tree of life, and that's where the whole world would be right now. But it didn't. And one of the principles of God, I didn't write this down, is that it doesn't matter which path you choose. The differences are the pain involved. But if you take the wrong path and you aren't destroyed by it, you will learn incredibly from it and be an incredible force for good. The problem is, of course, how are you going to survive through it? And there are many people who have gone into Satanism, drug addicts, whatever, and they've turned around their life and become a force for good. You could see it all over the place. So there isn't a time to not turn. Never too late. It's always for the best, highest good to take what you have learned from the dark so that you could warn the light. Experientially, I've been there. I've gone through a type of thing. Here's what the deal is. I'm not sitting here in my white robe on a high horse preaching, no, don't do that. I was in the dirt. I was down in there, and here's the deal. So nothing gets on. It's almost like the worst you can get, if you turn around, you be that much better. It's almost like if you go back to the original, if we would have ate the tree of life, we wouldn't have had the pain and suffering, but the lessons that one would learn would be longer and less. So I'm not saying, so take a leap off the deep end and really learn, because there are people who are destroyed in that process. And so now they enter the hereafter in negativeness, and it won't be pleasant. But to me, it's consolation knowing that no matter what happens, well, good can always come of it. And I say that scary. I'm like, okay, so I don't want to lose my limbs in a car accident so I can show people how to, no, I don't look at it that way. So this is where I kind of ended, and I feel like this is a good spot to end. If you have questions about Jesus' teachings or principles in the Bible, anything along the way, I will do a show with those questions. Outside of the purview of this. You notice I haven't talked about any news items. There's stuff to talk about, but there's so many people talking about it. Do you really need me? I don't know how many people are talking about this. So this is why I'm kind of like, I feel like this is what I should be doing. Any kind of comments and feedback on it would be appreciated, though I'm going to, probably do it anyway. But it's nice to know if somebody is getting from this. Again, I'm doing this as an audio only on Spreaker. I'll upload it to Spreaker, but it will come up on YouTube and on any of those formats. If you like it, it always is always nice as feedback as well as letting other people know that someone liked it. If you subscribe and all that stuff, it's all good. feettothefireradio.com is the website, and from there you can learn all the shows I've done, other things, other ways you can help me or help the show, whatever. All that stuff is there. I just don't talk about it much. So I think with that, we will say God bless. God, and I'd say this in prayer, God, please open our eyes and our mind and strengthen our spine in these times that are around us right now. As it appears we're going into these latter days, we need your help more than ever. I pray as instructed by Jesus in his name. Amen.
Oh, my old friend. walked before, the one who walk again, the ancient one of old, with wisdom for the new. Revive our inner sight, retell your timeless truths. Oh, it's your word.
Feet to Fire is a production of IPS Media Works on the Jancik Radio network of stations.